All right, my friends, welcome back to another V-Rising video. This has been a highly requested video. People have been asking me to do a tier list for quite a while now for the weapons in both PvP and PvE. And this one's going to be specifically for PvE. I actually don't think it is worth doing a tier list for PvP on the weapon side personally, because while there are some weapons that you'll see more often than others in PvP, the amount of those is not all that high, and right now, in my opinion, weapon balance is as the best it's ever been in this game, to the point that whatever the tier list would essentially be, you know, putting a few things on the S tier and then everything else would go on A tier. So for PvP, I'm just not going to do that one. If somebody feels like they want to do that one, they can, but I don't really see the benefit to doing that. But for PvE, this could be a little bit more fun. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this. Another disclaimer for the PvE side. At the end of the day, you can clear the entire game with any weapon. And you actually don't even have to use a weapon's abilities to do damage if you don't want to, because you could really just build for spell damage and then use weapons to like walk away from the enemies all the time and then just spam spells and let them hard carry you that way. So, but regardless, we're still going to rank these in terms of what their usefulness is in PvE. So let's go ahead and get started. So starting with the axes. The axes are one of my favorite PvE weapons. I was using them back in the original early access version of the game. They were my main. I pretty much only used these. I would use axes and like crossbow and then spear sometimes, or maybe sword. Those three was what I liked the most, but axes specifically were always what I would use. I just find them very useful in PvE. For the E does solid damage, 160% physical damage if you hit both axes, and they hit in an AoE, which is really great for mobbing. And the Q does 100% physical damage, but also the big thing that's nice about the Q in PvE is you can kind of use the Q, the little lunge or jump forward, as a semi-iframe, or not really iframe, more like a dodge, I guess you could say, to dodge abilities that you may otherwise not be able to do. So for me, axes are just an amazing overall weapon. They are definitely not on the S tier, but for me, I feel like they are never a bad choice in PvE. The only thing they're missing that would put them on S tier is an iframe, which that would just be the most disgusting thing ever. But for me, I think they are absolutely A tier. Next thing we're going to have here is the claws. One of the new additions in the 1.1 patch. The claws are pretty disgusting for PvE. I actually think they're probably the third best weapon overall for PvE compared to everything else. I think they are an easy S tier PvE weapon. I was able to clear Brutal Matka, who is level 79. When I was level 63. The reason why they're so strong is because in PvP, the hardest thing to do with these things is get ruptures off, right? Like you want to get those ruptures, you want to get those 3 stacks of puncture to rupture and do a ton of bonus damage. But anyone who has 2 brain cells to rub together will do everything they can to not let you do that. Well, it turns out that in PvE, they don't know how to not let you do that. So you can kind of just constantly detonate rupture stacks, so you're getting this huge 125% detonation as bonus damage all the time. Then the E is a huge gap closer that is also an iframe. You can also use attack speed and movement speed to strafe around them with your auto attacks, because you actually have pretty solid strafe speed while you're using your primary attacks with claws. So you can strafe around them and do huge damage that way. These things, all in all, are absolutely disgusting, and in my opinion, are the third best PvE weapon in the game. Crossbow, I'm going to put it up here in A tier as well. I think it might be... It's like in between here, so it sounds crazy. This thing, don't get me wrong, this thing is disgusting. It's very powerful for mobbing with the Q, or I guess mobbing with the Q is nice. And it's also extremely good for bossing, because it has such a long range, and the bosses generally have large hitboxes, and then the left click just hits a lot for 100% physical damage. So overall, these things are really, really good. A tier for bossing, in my opinion. The problem is with them on the mobbing side, the Q is okay, but everything else just feels not all that great. You generally want something else to go with it, but they are just so powerful on the bossing side. However, I think I'm still gonna put it in the B tier for now, just to stir up a little bit of controversy. So we're gonna put this in B tier for now. Maybe that'll change in the future, but all right. Then there are the daggers. Daggers are the right now I'm having a hard time deciding between the best or second best overall in PvE. They do by far do the most damage in PvE. Everything just hits so hard, and then the E, because the enemies are too clueless to dodge, you can very easily line up Qs or Es that hit like 8, 12, 20 daggers on a single target and just do 400, 500 damage, however much damage from the E recalls. So, and then on top of that, the Q is an iframe, and the poke has a longer range than pistols, meaning it is safer range than pistols, and it does more damage more quickly than pistols. Whenever you decide to use your attack, you just throw out 160 physical damage in the blink of an eye. Very, very, very powerful. Spear is, I have to put it in A here. Spear is just really strong. The one thing that you're missing out on in Spear is that the E isn't the greatest. I think I almost want to put it in B tier, but I think I actually can't, because the Q makes up for the E's lack of damage so much that it kind of doesn't really matter. It does 25% bonus damage to creature type bosses. So like anything that's a creature or anything that's like an animal type boss, this thing does bonus damage to, which is really nice. And the Q makes up so much for the E not doing a ton of damage that I kind of have to put it here. The range is solid, really good veil attacks, and the Q, like in mobbing, you can lock down big groups of enemies, 3, 4 enemies at a time, and it essentially does a blender on bosses. So I feel like I want to put it in A tier. I think I have to put it in A tier because I mean this, and then you get like Thousand Storms. I'm not going to go into legendaries, but I'm just thinking about Thousand Storms, just how powerful that is in general. But Greatsword, I put at the top of A tier. You could probably put it in S tier, honestly. It really is that powerful. The only reason I'm not is, while the iframe is extremely useful for bossing and for dodging things, the overall damage, unless you run, you know, Blood Rage, Power Surge, that kind of thing. If you're running a Blood Rage, Power Surge build with this thing, it is disgusting. It is extremely powerful. But if you're not running that specific build, I feel like it's definitely never a bad choice kind of weapon, but it just can't compare, in my opinion, to up here, these weapons up here that can also do things like Blood Rage, Power Surge on claws, and then also get detonations, you know what I mean? And they have the iframe that is also a gap closing iframe that does damage and does detonations, that kind of thing. So for me, I kind of put Greatsword. Look, it's, like I said, never a bad choice, and I'm going to put it at the top of A tier for now. But yeah. And Longbow, I'm going to put up here as well. I'm going to put it ahead of Axes, behind... I might put it ahead of Greatsword. The thing about Longbow is that everything that I said about Crossbow applies to Longbow, that it can hit in a big AoE. It does a ton of damage from a really long range. It just so happens that it does more damage from a longer range with the left click. The Q is way better at mobbing than the Crossbow's Q. The left click is better mobbing tool than the Crossbow because the left click pierces enemies, right? So it just pierces through a bunch of enemies. And then the E is strictly better than the Crossbow's E for mobbing and for bossing. It does so much damage, and whenever the boss just sits there letting you stack up focus stacks, you can hit him with the E and just do hundreds of damage. So the only reason I think I might actually put it above the Greatsword, simply because of the damage. The overall damage this thing does is just, it's very powerful in all aspects of PvE. Slashers, this one's a hard one for me to place. I almost want to put it in, like, not trash can, but like rename this as something else, like to you know, insanely overpowered, broken, but also like breaks the game but also isn't good on its own, if that makes sense. Like, it is good on its own but not at the same time. But the reason I'm considering putting this in S tier, I'm probably going to put this in S tier, is because the E is the most game-breaking ability in PvE of all time. So whenever you use E and you go invisible, you drop all aggro from everyone, which gives you a way to just fully reposition, get out of some kind of bad situation. So like if an enemy is channeling up an ability and they're about to, like, you know, like they're winding up and they're about to hit you, you can just press E and they'll stop. I will say there are some bosses it doesn't feel as good against, but you take advantage of like spells for this. So like the only reason I'm considering putting an A tier is that you kind of want to have spells specifically. I mean, you always want to have spells, but you kind of are relying heavily on spell power things with this to actually make it like worth using, because otherwise you're just going to be like constant kiting and doing no damage. That's why I would say it's probably, I'm gonna put it on S tier. It is really that good. Yes, it's a little bit spell dependent, but it just makes, other than the having to use spells, it makes every aspect of PvE just a joke. Actually, it's not that great at mobbing, so maybe we'll put an A tier. Okay, we'll put it in A tier. We'll leave it there. Maybe I'll decide. I'll change my mind at the end. And then Mace, I just insta put this in C tier. I don't really like. Look, there's reason to pick it for mobbing, I guess. You press E and smack everything away from you. And if you're using like, I don't know, AoEs and stuff, that can be kind of nice. I just don't get why you would ever pick this over any other weapon. I really don't. I mean, the Q does hit hard, 150% physical damage. It's a little bit of movement, and it's hits in an AoE, which is fine. But the issue here is that the E does very little damage and incapacitates, which is fine for mobbing. That's fine to like knock things away from you, incapacitate things in mobbing. But like, why do I care about that? Like, it does nothing in bossing. It's like, it's worse than Spear E in bossing. So to me, I just don't understand why you would ever pick this. The Q is just like a one and done thing. The attacks don't even really hit that hard. They hit okay, and they're like fairly slow. So overall, I don't really see why you would pick the Mace for PvE. At the end of the day, I'm just slapping this thing in C tier. Again, I don't get why you would pick this over anything else. And then pistols, we're slapping them right up here in S tier, easy mode. These things have hard carried me through PvE since Gloomrot for 2 years now, essentially. I mean, it's just been, these things are, I almost want to put them at the top above Daggers. The only reason, actually, I think I'm going to. Yeah, I'm going to put them above Daggers. And the reason why I would put these things above Daggers is that, so the Q just hits hilariously hard in PvE, both in mobbing and in bossing. And the E, while it doesn't, while overall the damage is not as high as the peak damage on Daggers, the range is still really strong. Like the range distance and the amount of the shots itself is really good. Again, not as good as the Daggers, but the E is the superior iframe compared to Daggers. Ease of use of the E and how much danger you can get out of. Like there's so many times where you're just like, I should be dead here, and then you just press E and you don't even get hit. So for me, I put overall, bossing wise, I feel like these are going to be, at the end of the day, they're safer, and therefore, to me, because you're safer, you're just trying to beat the boss. That's the goal. And these things still do amazing damage, and they're just the safest weapon overall. Next, we're going to go to Reaper. Reaper, I'm going to put on probably here. I'm probably right here on A tier. E is so powerful. It does incredibly large amounts of damage and is a set and forget kind of thing, which is super useful. And then the Q, while it doesn't hit as like harder than some other things, it still hits what is like 130% physical, which is harder than a Greatsword Q. Really strong there. And it works extremely well in mobbing. So if you get a bunch of enemies around you, you can just smack them all for 130% physical damage. So yeah, I think overall, just this thing hard carried me as well, like in early access. This and Axes, I would just use both of these so much. Oh, it's hard to say. I might put it here. I'm gonna put it here. Yeah, I'll put it here because of the safety. So like, if you are confident enough in your fights, then this Greatsword will have the edge because it has an iframe. But if you're not confident and you're just really trying to play safe and like kite endlessly, the Reaper is hard to beat. I'll put it here. I think it's probably a good spot for it. Sword, I'm gonna put on B tier. Almost considering C tier. No, we're gonna pay B tier. This thing is really strong. The problem, it's missing something. The E is technically an iframe, and if you're talented enough or you know the fights well enough, you can use it to dodge certain big boss mechanics. The reason it's in B here is the Q admittedly does slap in mobbing. It hits very hard in mobbing. So if you have, again, like static and condemn on top of them at one time, you can spin through everything with the Q on this thing and just chunk huge waves of enemies for a lot of damage. However, like I said, the E just, to me, isn't really enough compared to some of the other stuff. So I kind of put it in the missing something. It's absolutely usable and works really well, but is just, it's missing something. I would say it's missing something. Actually, go to the whip. Whip, we're probably gonna go. I kind of want to put in, no, I'm not gonna put in C tier. Whip is good. Whip is good. The issue with whip is that the range got nerfed. The attack speed isn't super nerfed or anything. Specifically, got changed a little bit. The range got nerfed, and but it still does do solid damage if you space it really well. It doesn't have an iframe. And other than not having an iframe, this thing is fine. So it does solid damage on the auto attack. The Q does 100% physical and knocks back, which is nice for mobbing. Okay in bossing, and then the E does, you know, the 100% physical and entangles, which is like really just bonus damage on your E. So I kind of put on the missing something here. Now, if we were talking about the Morning Star, I would probably put it like right there on S tier. So even though it is technically doesn't have an iframe, it does so much damage if you build for it. In with the specifically the Morning Star, that I would probably put up to S tier at the very late at the least top of A tier. But because it does, you know, we're just talking regular whip in general, I'm kind of putting, I feel like I'm pretty confident that it's a B tier weapon. And then finally we are at the Twinblade. Twinblade is very strong for mobbing. So I did this playthrough recently where I was in Silverlight, and I would essentially aggro as many enemies as I possibly could and then kite them away. Then I would throw the Twinblade on top of them, and I would put something in front of me, like I would either use like an aftershock as I'm pulling them to me, or I would use like a Rain of Chaos or whatever it may be. I could pull them all to me, hit them all with the, you know, that recast, and then they would all get hit in my AoE while I'm, you know, hitting with E or hitting with auto attacks, that kind of thing. The E is not good for stuff. I mean, it's fine. It just does 100% physical damage, is nice, but like knock up in that regard, I don't really care about. It is good against like mobbing, I guess, is probably fine, but I don't know if it's good enough. We're gonna put it in like A tier. Maybe I do put it in A tier, because the left clicks do tons of damage. So it essentially has the left click power of a Greatsword for the most part if you're running static. The Q is super good for mobbing and good for bossing, actually. Now I'm thinking about it, it's actually good for bossing too, because you can use it to reposition to if you have to in bad situations. So yeah, I'll probably put it at the bottom of A tier. I don't think it deserves to be any higher than that. And the Q is good too, because you can throw those over things. So if you like kite bosses around like walls and stuff, you can kind of throw it over walls. So actually we're gonna put it here. We'll put it here. It's actually hard to say. I'll put it here. I'll put it here on A tier. Probably better than Spear. I might be going crazy. Now, the more I think about it, the more I'm moving up the list. I think it's probably better. Yeah, it's better than Axis. It definitely is better than Axis. Okay, so we're going to put it here. I think this is probably a good home for it. Anyway, that is probably going to be it for the tier list. Let me see really quickly if I want to change any positions of anything. I think I'm probably good to go. We'll go like that, actually. That might actually need to change right there. Put the whip right there. So, okay, that is probably better. So, all right, overall, that's going to be it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, if you totally disagree with me, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. But until next time, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you in the next one.